Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to NAB 2011, and welcome to the Autodesk booth. For the next half an hour, we're going to take a look at a presentation that we call the Ultimate Stereoscopic Finishing Pipeline,
That's right.
Flame Premium.
Yep.
And I have my colleague Will Harris here. Welcome, Will.
Thanks. Yep.
So what we're going to talk about in this presentation are the different components of Flame Premium. You'll see that we're going to talk about our timeline editorial workflow. We're going to talk a bit about how you can do visual effects, things like 3D tracking, and we're also going to talk about color grading, the real-time color grading aspect of the product, which again we can work in either mono or in stereo. So we're going to focus on the stereoscopic angle for this particular presentation. So that's why we've passed out a bunch of glasses to the people here in the audience. And what we want to concentrate on is not only the way that we work with our stereo tools, but how we can actually bring the multi-track timeline with matte containers between the different tasks that we need to accomplish in this particular workflow. That's right. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Will Harris, who's sitting in front of Flame Premium, and he's going to take us through the process.
Yes, I'm actually working here in the timeline part of Flame Premium, and I wanted to start by playing out this master that the guys from OASIS Imagery very kindly gave us to use here.
And put your glasses on for this. You'll need your glasses. Let them just get set up there, Will.
Okay.
Everybody's ready, so you're going to enjoy this, and thanks to OASIS. It's nothing like muscle cars and 3D stereoscopic.
Some good old American fun.
Exactly.
That's great. Yeah, so that's again, thanks to the guys from OASIS in Hollywood for that stuff. And we wanted to take you through a kind of essentially a conform effects and grading story here. So you'll be able to see how, how something like this can go from start to finish. If I just start my process here by actually looking outwards at my media that's stored out on my SAN or my NAS, wherever you might store media, you can actually see your XML file. In this case, a XML or AAF file can be read in, and you're able to then look at pieces of media here, QuickTime media, Red media, ARRI raw media, the different formats, all the different formats we support, and do a simple kind of drag and drop conform here. So you can just say, I want to match based on these characteristics, and I want to just essentially drag this in and search for everything that's below this location. So be able to see a pretty instant result here. If I just drop this down into my timeline, you'll be able to see that what I get here is essentially a couple of pieces, right? We have the stereo pieces here.
The left and the right eye.
And bear in mind that your editorial tool may not be aware of left and right. You may have to just come in here and say, hey, this is a stereo pair. So I'm going to merge those together, call that my primary, and right away you can see we've immediately got a stereo combination of the two pieces here.
So you should see that through the glasses now.
Yep. We have a whole bunch of different ways of delivering stereo, by the way. So if you wanted to, you could output your stuff in side-by-side, top-bottom, dual output, or indeed an interlaced output if you wanted. So that's just a cool thing to have at the end of the line. But specifically, we want to take you into some of the sort of compositing challenges that we would be working with. Along the way, of course, you could see that working with stereo in the timeline is that dead easy in terms of, it's just like working with mono, things happen synchronously here. If I add a transition between two shots, you can see it happens on both. You can do non-synchronous things if you want, but specifically you might want to do something like a simple convergence adjustment right on the right on the timeline if you like.
Let's try a shot where there's a little more image and a little less smoke there.
That's a good idea.
There we go.
Thanks. Yeah, let's try this one. So then if I went in here and just take a look at my stereo tab here, and we'll just take a look at it on the large view here, you'll be able to see how I've got a simple sort of convergence adjustment right here on the timeline if I want it. So you can see how that's just racking the shot back and forth if I want it. But specifically, like I said, we wanted to drill into some of the stuff that you can do when you work compositing on a shot. So if you wanted to put something like text or graphics before, in front, and behind this car, doing that in stereo is an interesting process, and we just wanted to take a look at that. So you'll be able to see here how if I just drag out my piece here, I'm just going to take a cut of this, and then I'm going to take these elements into the action environment. So this is taking a stereo source into action, and what you'll be able to see is that right off the bat here in action, I have my stereo functionality, and if I just come in here and turn off the background so that when we cut this out, you'll be able to see what I mean. So like I said, we want to put things in front and behind the car.
So we're in the compositing area of the application.
We're in action, which is where we have things like our proper camera-based system here so that you can see exactly what's going on inside of your view here. So there's our camera. You can see that it's looking at this plate that has baked stereo in it. So we're going to need to consider that when we do our compositing. The first step, of course, in any kind of compositing could often be rotoscoping or masking or keying. So in this situation, I literally just want to be able to put things in front and behind of this car. But of course, we need to consider the stereo aspect of that. So I just want to talk you through that. So you can see how by doing this kind of a deal, I'm just going to pick what I should probably do is look at just one eye when I do this process. So if I just look at just my left eye here, you'll be able to see how that lines up with my left eye car. And of course, we want the opposite of that, right? We want to cut out the car. And I'm just going to jump right in and hit the button to shape track this. So this is probably the best tool to be able to get the analysis of that movement that we see in this shot. We have different types of trackers here, but certainly the shape tracker really lends itself well. So if we wanted to, we could jump in here and actually then essentially move pieces out, make subtle adjustments, change scale functions here via a centroid point in our tool. So if we just take the wheel, for example, here, set the center point and suck it back in a little bit as it got a little big in the track, you can see how I can sort of control that and really even that out nicely. Or just essentially regular adjustments here as well. So this is just a nice way to be able to work. Once I got my end frame in a little more shape here, what I should be able to do is show you how that could be a pretty easy way to deal with the solution for this kind of track. I might just add a little softness in here to just blend this back a little bit. But the thing that you might be coming into your mind now is how we deal with working with the other eye. So simply put here, we've made something that works well on the left, but we need to just do a quick offset to apply it to the right. So I'm going to come in here to my mask and say, hey, this is the left eye. It's good for the left, but I want to take this section here and apply it and use it for the right. So I'm going to come over here and just lay it out in a meaningful way for me, for left and right, and call this one the right. And then by introducing a little offset axis here, this is just another modifier, I can build myself a little setup here that really works nicely for dealing with this. So if we just take a look at the right eye here, you'll see the problem essentially that this is now in a slightly the wrong spot. So if I move my offset here, you'll see the problem, right? So if offset could work, but rotation is maybe a more intuitive way of dealing with this problem. So if you think about the difference between two different cameras that are perhaps converged in this case, they could point inwards, and with a simple like 2 or 3 degree offset here, you could actually probably get it dialed in pretty well. Once you've done that, of course, your rotor might need to be further refined. So by just duplicating a link between my left and right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change both of them, but using the offset that's right here. So this is kind of a clever way of making one shape, using it twice, and dealing with the differences between two eyes.
So we've cut the car out, we've separated that from the background, we want to reintroduce the background and push that away from the camera, right? So create some distance between those two layers.
That's right, yeah. If I wanted to just bring in a piece of text here, you could see how it needs to be attached to the car, right? But it can be driven by the track, by the way, at the same time. So you can see how we're getting somewhere now, right? But if I now just wanted to reintroduce, like you said, my background right into here, what I can then start doing is breaking things apart in space. So I'll take this guy here, and I'll use my auto scale function, which keeps it at the same scale as the camera frustum as I go back, and move this background way, way back in space. So that's a great way to be able to spread out your scene a little bit, so you can see that it's starting to look like this, right? Then I'll also take the next layer here and do the same thing. I'll take him, scale him back in space, but as he goes, what you might start to notice, especially if we look at the stereo result here, is that nothing is changing in the stereo part of this. Essentially, all that's happening is moving back at perfect scale, but the text is changing stereo because it's moving back. It's a mono element. And by getting it right there where the text lines up with the amount of divergence of the wheel, I know I've placed my car in just the right spot. So that's great. So that means that I can now take my text, pull it forward if I like, and do a kind of a hanging out in front type effect, or send it backwards. And as soon as I go backwards here, scale it up, move it up, you'll be able to see how it will sit there in the background. And we're in a neat place where we could then start doing these kind of effects with the content going back and forth within.
So you've really, I think, explained well the whole process of taking things, separating them, getting them in the proper stereo relationship to each other. So this is kind of jumping ahead a bit. You've got this this sort of finalized example.
Just with a few more minutes, you might just build your text and lay it out in space like this to really get a cool looking
Can we bring that up?
result.
Yeah, there we go. So with your glasses on now, you'll be able to see the full stereo effect of the text placed on both sides of the car, and of course the background pushed much further back in the distance. So that's a great introduction to stereoscopic compositing. Why don't we take a little more challenging shot and talk about the 3D tracking?
Yeah, I actually have a shot here that that could really use a sky replacement. This shot down here where we might like a more kind of dramatic sky in here, and what we could do is we could actually take this into our batch environment and work with it using our new stereo analyzer. And this is a tool that it's kind of a similar technique to what you just saw, except this time what we'll do is we'll use that mask to not consider the car in our tracking solution.
Right, ignore what's inside that shape.
So then what I can do now, I can just use this thing called a stereo analyzer, which, as the name suggests, is for analyzing stereo footage. And then as I just, if I just guess my, my focal length here and do an analysis, what you'll be able to see is that this gives me a solve for the camera, which I can then refine if I need. But bear in mind, it's considering both plates. It's doing a stereo rig analysis of this. And as we scrub through here, we can then decide whether we think that's going to work for us or if we might need a little more adjustment. Hopefully you can start to see, though, how this comes together with an actual scene. If I just scrub through the scene, you can see how the car's moving past this set of points, which kind of represents the ground and the mountains, and gives us enough information to then be able to deal with doing background replacement.
Right.
So this is cool. So this is what we want to see. We want to be able to take something like that. We're done with our mask at that point and our analyzer. So we'll just take our camera, make sure it's correctly assigned here, and I'm actually going to hide it from view as it's right there in our way. And you can see how viewing from this result here, things will become apparent when I start keying my background out. So I'm going to use one of our tools here, the modular keyer, which is a really powerful tool set, including things such as this one called the 3D keyer.
Yeah, this is a great keying tool.
Yeah.
I mean, you can key things that you didn't expect you could key.
Yeah, so certainly, like if you just build a little tolerance here and then add some noise sampling, this gets me an idea of where I could go. And then just by just blending in here, you could see how with a little bit of tolerance picking, I could get myself to a key that could work for the top there, and then perhaps just with a little help from my friends, the G masks, which you've seen a little bit of right now, so we'll just load one of those. That is a way of then being able to get a solution there. So next up what I'll do is I'll just put that onto my right eye as well.
Right, copy and paste the same thing for both eyes.
That's it. Just double check, though, that there are differences between, as there might be.
Right,
so I can just
when you're shooting with two separate cameras, you may have different adjustments to make.
And this being such a fine-tuned keyer, you definitely want to get that just right. But then from here, you now have a stereo result which looks like this, so you can start to see how we're getting there. But specifically, what we might want to do then is to throw in an image as a background source. So if we actually just jump in with an image like this is just a big, wide sky cyc. You can see that if I take it here, it sits in the scene. If I go back to the beginning here and just send it all the way back in space, what you'll be able to see if I scale it up and just sort my layers, you'll be able to see that this is just an interesting solution for doing a sky replacement. That's just a bit too big. But if we had something like about here, you could see that this is a cut. If we look way back on our scene, you can see that the camera's moving the back plane. So you're going to need to probably wrap it a little more. One great way to try this out is using what we call an IBL node, or an image-based light. This can be used to impact the scene in various ways via shading, but also can be used as a background. So I can just come in here and say, hey, I want to just rough out my sky in this fashion. So by just changing my sky in here, you can start to see how things are going to work with just a quick rough out of my sky. But I can also use an IBL to actually define how things get reflected in the scene. So rather than using that one as a back, I'm going to use this one as a shader, just hang it off my layer here. And if I just sort of blend it back down here, hopefully you'll be able to see how you can get the environment, if you want, of your scene actually just reflected into the image quality or the color quality of your foreground elements.
Right, it's like putting that imagery inside of a ball or sphere
exactly
with that mapped on the sphere.
Yep.
So you get all those same properties that you would have in the color aspect of that image.
You do.
So maybe we should jump ahead and take a look at the final result with a little more finessing, where you would get with that scene.
Well, actually, we wrapped it at a little more detail and actually added in a lens flare into our scene here. So
this is cool. In stereo, you can see that our relighting tools, things like lens flares and edge rays, those can actually be sitting in a stereo scene, so you'll see them actually coming towards you in 3D space.
Yeah, that's right. So you should be able to see this in stereo as well. If I actually change the pivot point of my lens flare, you can see that is actually an added in post effect, if you like, that is integrated into our 3D environment. That's our lens flare, which we can then play with and nuance as we like.
Can you move it like left to right, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if I take that and just swing it around here, what you'll see is that it can be used with an animated sort of scan through effect here. The light itself obviously has a density that we can throw in here.
Oh, it's working, yeah.
Yeah, and as we move it up and down, you'll be able to get different sort of effects looking pretty good there. So yeah, that might be what you work with. You might also output mattes from a scene like this, where you might want to just have a matte out and also a lens flare out as a matte element.
Because these mattes can be put back into that multi-layer timeline, stereoscopic timeline, in a container, and then repurposed when we get over into grading.
That might look something like this, Bill, where you have a bunch of elements stacked. You might have versions there, but this one here particularly is actually a matte container that contains the different elements that we want from that first shot.
Right.
So that'd be a great thing to look at in the grading.
Yeah, and it's color coded differently, so you know it's indicating that it's a purple color. Maybe exit back out so we just see. I just want you to remember this color, so when we get over into grading, you'll notice that we have that same convention over there. So with that, let's go ahead and switch over to our graphic and allow Will to restart into the grading part of Flame Premium. So just to reiterate that we are going to be able to now pass that entire timeline with the effects and the mattes that were inside the container. It's a bi-directional process, so you can see the arrows moving there, and also you have the ability to, again, step inside of those and repurpose those mattes for the rest of the presentation, which will be focusing on real-time color grading.
That's right, yeah. So here we are in our grading package, and you can probably see by the basic UI here that this is designed for working that color work, as well as being able to do masking and keying directly into a kind of a real-time environment here. It's pretty cool. And if I just take my timeline that was created there, I'm actually just browsing right into the library of the Flame Premium there. and just taking a session, if you like, of that timeline to work with. What you'll see right away is that it is just the same, and that what I want to point out there is the way that your timeline has the same exact pieces in it as we just saw. So you can see all the pieces coming in there.
It's because we're working with one sort of synchronized project here.
That's right. So there's our timeline just as it was, including the each stereo all the way up. But specifically, we want to look into essentially the horsepower we have here. And certainly one of the things that you want to be able to do in a situation like this is obviously work with your stereo content. And as we just play through here, playing both eyes in real time, you can see that we might do essentially the last part of this process could be a grading process. And if I just wanted to just zero in on this shot here a little bit, I'm actually just going to loop it so that you can see how that you're able to start grading right here and working in this sync mode to work on both eyes simultaneously. What I can do then is just dial in a look that I like, and then I can use the different layered pieces of our tool here to actually start calling out different pieces here. So this is the secondary stack, and I wanted to just come in here and emphasize the blue car, but also bring out the headlights detail if you like. So I'm just using a curves there on layer 1.
So that's one type of secondary that you could use, but you also have shapes.
Yeah, I have the ability to go ahead and add in a shape like this. So let me just get that kind of Tony Scott looking effect going on here. We can get a nice grade inside and outside my mask, which by the way looks like this. So if I just went in and
maybe you need to make it a little smaller because the edges weren't showing.
I'll do that. Yeah, I'll make it just a little bit smaller so you can see how things come in. So then working on the outside, you can then actually have an adjustment here that gives you that sort of heavy vignetted effect. You might want to dial that down here so it looks sort of more like that. And you can keep going up, building different effects here. So you might want to build in a soft ramp for the kind of lower part of the shot to get yourself a nice looking kind of blended, shaded look for this scene. So that might be the kind of thing that you do as a generic and save right here into the grade bin. And then you could sample through different ones that you like perhaps already, but we might use that later as we go down our timeline. There's just one last thing I wanted to show you with this shot. A really cool tool, having darkened down things here, what I might do is actually take out one of our shape systems here and actually do that same kind of track that you just saw over in the timeline part, but deal with things like a variable softness map and actually dial in a nice soft edge here that spans out over there, building a map like that, to then be able to grade through here and bring out the headlights, right? The cool thing that we can use here then is the ability to use that same shape tracking technology to go through and analyze that. So it's also useful for grading, as we were saying, and this is just a neat technique where you can then come in here and bring the detail in the headlights back specific to this shot, right?
Yeah, it really allows you to isolate different areas and sort of adjust all the various levels.
That's right. So then I would keep plugging things in here. I might decide that I want to select all my shots here, maybe accept that one, and migrate this basic grade across the entire sequence. So if that might be something I wanted, I could of course nuance it in different ones. But on this shot here, you might remember we were working with mats in the compositing. So we might actually want to keep building up our secondary stack here and actually use the mats that came through. So you saw in the timeline this purple color, and if we can actually go right in and use those as part of our secondary system. So we can come in here, we'll switch to our mat view, and then just kind of go fishing for the different mats that are available to us. If I wanted to use the car, I could, and I could grade through the car if I wanted. So that might not be, you may do that, you may not, but more specifically, you might want to deal with your rock layers, and you might have noticed that things are essentially in front and behind. So on another layer here, I'm actually going to use that secondary. So as we just come in here, we'll take a look at the mats that are available to us, and this one is the essentially the text element. If I then start grading with this, you'll be able to see that a problem emerges with kind of the burn through into the car, right? So this is just a problem that you would need to solve. And this is a great situation where if you don't have every single mat that you need, you can make them. So you can come in here and you remember the original mat for the car here. Well, I can just do like a logic hopping
Maybe move a little bit
here.
more in the middle of the shot so we can.
Yeah,
there
sure.
we go. There we go.
So then I can do like a logic hopping sequence here where I can combine the mats in different ways. And of course, what I want is the inverse of that. So I want to be able to work with my graphics. And I've got, if you like, twice as many mats as I think I've got
Right.
by doing that, which is kind of cool. You can, of course, blur and tweak your mats as well, but be able to get a result that doesn't essentially impact different things in the foreground.
Maybe swing the color a little bit more.
Yeah, so I can do whatever you want there.
Yeah,
Actually.
I can tell you, as the director, change something.
Yeah,
all right,
absolutely.
so that's really a great example. So what we've been showing you is Flame Premium. It's really the ultimate stereoscopic finishing solution. We want to thank our friends at OASIS Imagery in Hollywood for providing that material. You've seen a little bit, just a taste in a half hour of some of the capabilities, but really we've got a fully loaded functioning software here with multiple tasks that can be accomplished in the different areas of the software. So we looked at the timeline workflow. There's also a visual effects area in the software for procedural compositing. We've also talked a bit about the real-time grading and also the powerful relighting tools, like when we put that lens flare in. So these tools are obviously used every day in monoscopic workflows, but we want to tell our users that it's just as easy to do a stereoscopic project because we've rewritten all the tools to work in stereo.
Yep.